Hello, this is Teresa. I'm back with another video tutorial for Dare to Be Artsy. I'll be sharing this cute Christmas card with a nice scene in the background, and I'm using the new Christmas stamp set from Dare to Be Artsy. I will also be using some removable labeling tape, which I'll use to do some masking, and I have a Christmas tree stencil that I will be using to create my scene. I'm not going to be showing the coloring of the two stamps. I'm going to be doing no line coloring on those, and what I'm doing right now is I've just used the matching dies to die cut masking paper. So after I finish my cupcake coloring of the two images, I will cover over both of them with the two masks that I already cut out earlier. And then once those are in place, I'm going to start working on the background. Now that I have these masked off, they won't be colored over while I create the background behind them. In this way, I can create a one-layer scenic card. I don't do a whole lot of one-layer cards, but this just called out to me to have that kind of thing, and I wanted to create a lot of dimension without adding a lot of layers. And so this tape is something I use all the time for doing simpling masking, and sometimes it also works very well as a stamping or masking paper in and of itself. So I'm trying to plan on how I'm going to do my scene, and I decided to pull out my Distress Oxides. I'm using pumice stone, and I apologize for my camera moving. Apparently my stand got too close to the table, so I will adjust it in a minute, so I hope you can bear with me just a minute until I get to that point. And I suddenly realized that I had the black soot out, and that is not what I wanted to start with, so luckily I didn't get very far on that where I can actually blend that in and it will look just fine, even though that's not how I intended to start this. So I start by using this large makeup brush to swipe on some of this Distress Oxide ink in pumice stone. And I'm kind of creating not exactly stormy sky, but sometimes when there's a heavy snow going on or is just past, sometimes the sky is just kind of grayish looking. And you might think of there's snow coming down in the distance. So I'm also going to create the illusion of mountainsides by using this masking tape and then continuing to add some more ink on top. But I'm not going to go down on the bottom side of the tape. I'm just going to keep it up there in that top left-hand corner and just make it slightly darker. And then I want to have yet another mountain range that looks like it's behind this one. So to create that illusion, I'm just going to move my mask around so it's kind of going in the opposite direction, and I replaced the mask that I already had there because what I want is for it to be darkest in that V or rectangle-ish area up at the very top. So as you can see, I just moved my mask around to make it possible to make just that area darker. So by the time I remove this removable tape, then you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And the reveal is always one of the fun things, especially the one where I remove the final mask off of the two moose images. So I'm taking one of the other masks and I'm putting it just slightly over where their hooves or feet are, and I'm just going to barely add a little bit of the pumice stone just above that line just to create another little snowbank area right down there towards the bottom. And at this point, I'm ready to add the rest of the scenery, which is going to consist of a lot of trees. And with this little stencil right here and some of this Distress Oxide ink, I'm going to create my trees. Now some of them I'm going to be a little more heavy-handed than others as far as how much ink I put down. So sometimes I may actually wipe a little of the excess ink off on the piece of copy paper that I have behind my card panel. And I'm going to make this first tree the darkest one because it's going to be the one that's most in the foreground. It's still behind where the moose critters are, but still it's going to be behind them, so it's the closest tree to the front of the card. So this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying creating kind of a foreground, a middle ground, and a distant background by what I'm doing. And a lot of this is going to look a bit repetitive. I'm using some brown walnut stain ink in order to add the trunk color at the very bottom of the stencil. And most of the time, I'm just going to move the stencil around and not necessarily worry about that trunk. I'm just going to, in some spots, like barely apply any ink at all. In others, I'm going to go a little more heavy-handed. So I'll try to speed that up just so you can see how I move through this process. And so in some places, I just add a little color at the very top of the stencil. And after a while, I thought a little bit better of it, and I ended up picking up one of my pieces of tape from earlier and putting it back over that snowbank, and then moving on with adding some more of the trees. I'm just kind of creating the look of trees way off in the very distance, so I'm not trying to make them very detailed. And another thing I want to do is also add some off to the sides and some that peek out from behind the two moose critters. And once I've gotten all that, it's time for the magic reveal, and that's to peel off the stamp masks over my critters. And this is always the super fun part, is just to see that pop of color suddenly come into the frame. And now that I have that, I have just a couple of additional things that I'm going to do that, which includes stamping a sentiment up there at the top center of the card. I'm also going to use a W4 Copic marker to add a little bit of shading, W2, W3, one of those. I'm adding a little shading underneath their feet so it doesn't look like they're just kind of floating there above the snow. And then I'll also add a big shadow there in that big tree, the biggest tree up in the front, and I'm going to bring that shadow forward, so it's going to kind of look like the sun is shining down from like a little bit behind it and casting that shadow forward. So this also helps to create that extra depth and dimension to this one layer card. So with that said, I'm stamping my sentiment. I trimmed this panel slightly, and I'm putting it on a piece of aqua cardstock that matches the aqua in the vest for the female moose. And that's my card for today. Thank you for watching, and here are a couple of videos that you can watch. See you next time.